So I often get asked, how should I price my work? How should I charge for my time? Is there a formula I can use? Give me a formula. I don't know how to price my work. And my answer is always, it depends. I know that's my answer for everything, but it depends because of a few important things you need to take into account in your own business. So in this episode, we're going to discuss why you should avoid formulas that you find on the internet. We're going to talk about pricing strategies, and we're going to talk about how to charge for your time and the thing you might not be considering, but it's super important. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm with me, Tara Swiger. For the entire month of March, we have been talking about money and profit in your business, mostly because you asked me to. When I put out a survey at the beginning of the year, you said that is the thing you wanted me to talk about. And I know you have questions. I get them in every Instagram post and comments on the YouTube videos. So I'm going to give you a chance to ask me your questions and get the answers. So we are going to do a webinar tomorrow on April 6th. Where I will answer all of your questions about bookkeeping and profit margins and everything. You're also going to get first access to my newly refreshed class, Pay Yourself. Now, to get that webinar, you'll just go to the show notes for this episode, which is taraswiger.com/podcast151. You're not only going to get the transcript when you sign up on that form at taraswiger.com/podcast151, you will also get a worksheet that will give you a place to ask your questions as you're listening. Or if you haven't listened to the last few episodes yet, print out this worksheet and fill it in as you're listening with any questions that come up. Then you can bring them to the webinar on April 6th. Now, if you're listening to this later, you can still go to that same link and sign up, and you're going to get lots of goodies, and you will get a recording of that webinar. So even if you can't make it live, you get the recording. So like I said, along with the transcript, you'll get a worksheet. You'll get invited to the webinar where you can ask your questions, or you can even send your questions in ahead of time if you know you can't make it. But that's all at taraswiger.com/podcast151. So now let's talk about pricing. I get asked all the time from people, is this a good price for my work? Is this a good profit margin? Is this right? And my answer is always, I don't know. I have to see all of your numbers in order to make that decision, which is why I teach you how to figure out those numbers for yourself so that you don't have to ask anyone else, but you are the expert in your own business and your own numbers. Now, you are going to find articles everywhere on the internet and blog posts and podcast episodes that tell you this is exactly how you should price your work. In fact, I just found one recently called How to Pay Yourself, and it gave a pricing formula that like everyone should use. And I've read tons of those articles, and every one I found as I'm reading, I'm thinking this does not apply to at least 50% of the people I work with, to makers, artists, designers. This just isn't going to work for them. And the reason why is because the writers of these articles, they assume that your business and your product and your experience is like theirs. So they're not saying this is how you should price your work. This is how they're saying this is what makes sense for my work. It's exactly like when we talk about how to deal with people's opinions, you should remember they're talking more about themselves than they are about you. The same thing is true for pricing. They're telling you what works for them, not necessarily what's going to work for you. So let's think about it. I'm going to give you some examples. So I have clients who sell hand-dyed yarn. Now they can sell, let's say they can dye 10 skeins at a time, and their supply cost is $10 per skein of yarn. Now compare that to another client who blows glass, and if she makes these beautiful glass sculptures, they each take quite a bit of time and detail, but the glass material itself is not that expensive per finished thing she's made. And another client is an artist, and she does drawings and illustrations and paintings. Now her supplies are paper and paints, which aren't that expensive, but she may spend anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours on a project. So I ask you, should all of them use the same formula? Of course not. That makes absolutely no sense. In some cases, they need to weigh more heavily their supply costs. In other cases, their supply costs might be low, but that doesn't mean they can have a super low price if they spent 10 hours of working on the thing. So your pricing needs to take into account the following things. One, your cost of goods sold. And in my class, Pay Yourself, I tell you how to find your cost of goods sold. If you're listening to this and you're like, I have no idea what that is. Then you need to take into account the time it takes you to make one item, and you need to take into account your overhead. You also need to take into account your income goal. And the final and most important thing I found that people are skipping out in their handmade business is how many of these items can you realistically make in a month or a week or a day? Because if it takes you 5 hours and you think, well, I'll work 10 hours a day and I'll make 2, but in fact, you usually only have 3 or 4 hours to work, then your amount you can produce in a month is going to not be what you think it is. So I actually learned this for myself when I quit my day job because my yarn company had grown to the point where it had replaced my day job salary. So I was like, all right, I now have so many more hours a day to spin yarn. I'm going to be able to produce so many more. Now, I'd already been doing it for 3 years on nights and weekends, so I knew that it took me about an hour to spin one skein of yarn after the wool's already dyed, and I could dye pounds of wool at a time. So that wasn't a real time consideration, but the actual spinning was the variable, the thing that affected how many I could make in a week. So if I could spin one skein of yarn in an hour, then you would assume that if I'm working 5 to 7 hours a day, I could spin 5 to 7 skeins of yarn a day, right? Yeah, that's what I thought, and I was wrong. So I only ever was able to spin about 3 skeins a day, no matter how I tried or how I tried to set up my time or how I planted myself on the couch and was like, I will not move until I've spun yarn. On an average day, I was spinning 3 skeins a day. So the reason why is because I had to answer emails, I had to get wool dyeing, I had to hang it up for it to dry, I had to label the finished yarn, I had to photograph it, I had to list it on Etsy, I had to actually label the skein. And in the days before smartphones, because remember this is like 2009, your phone did not have a good camera and it didn't connect and upload to Etsy. So I had to connect my camera to my computer and spend time importing the photos and then editing the photos in Photoshop because there weren't photo editing apps on a phone, which didn't exist. So I really could only ever get 3 skeins on an average work day. Now think, if I had done my math for what I wanted to make in my business and how many skeins of yarn I needed to produce, if I did all of that math based on 5 skeins a day, I would have never broken even or made enough to pay myself. But because I realized that I could only make 3 a day, I therefore could decide on my production schedule, decide on the other kinds of products I sold, and figure out my pricing to get paid, what I wanted to get paid, based on 3 skeins a day. So that's why it's so important, and this is the thing a lot of people skip, is how many of your products can you actually make in a day or a week or a month. That has to go in to your overall pricing or it's not going to all work out. Now, the other reason a simple formula isn't going to work for you is because of your brand. Now, your brand is what your company stands for and what the people who love it think of it. Your brand is a perception of customers, the perception they have based on your price, your product, and your positioning. So if you use someone else's formula for your pricing, you're also adopting parts of their brand as yours, and that's just not going to work if you want to stand out. Now, if you're having a hard time understanding this whole brand thing, I want you to think about the products you use and love and how their price is in alignment with their brand. So a couple of easy examples is Apple computers. The MacBook I'm recording this on right now, they have built a brand that allows them to charge way more than what my Google Chromebook costs, right? Google Chromebook is around $200 and a MacBook is around $1,200. Now, they have slightly different functionality, but the fact is a lot of it has to do with branding. Or also think about craft supplies at big box stores. So Michael's is the big box store near me. And I can tell you that a Michael's brand hole punch or scissors or paper goods costs at least $2 less than the Martha Stewart brand hole punch or paper goods. And when I go in, the Martha Stewart brand is usually all sold out. So not only does it cost up $2 or $5 more, depending on what it is, it's also always gone because the brand stands for something and that price reflects the brand and the brand is reflected in the price. So if you can't just use any formula for your strategy, how do you figure out a price for your product? Right? You might be kind of frustrated. You're like, okay, well, I know all the reasons that a formula isn't going to work. Now, what do I do? So in my class, Pricing 101, I teach 3 pricing formulas, and I ask all students to do the math for all 3 of the formulas. And when I have taught this class live, taught it all over North Carolina to traditional artists like woodworkers and glassblowers and stained glass people and photographers. They're always like, they always push back. They're like, no, I don't want to do all three. I'm like, it's a little bit of math to do 3 formulas for one product, but it teaches you so much. Some formulas take into account or weigh more heavily your cost of goods sold, while others weigh more heavily the amount of time you're spending. So I have people do all 3, look at the range of prices that come up, and usually they're like a huge range of prices. Like they can vary from $10 to $50 to $100 between the different formulas for the exact same product and the exact same person. That lets them see the range of where they need to pay attention, and then they can make a price that, or they can land on a price that makes sense with their supplies and their time and everything. Because once they do the math to get those prices with those formulas, it's just the first step. The next thing is that they need to figure out how it fits into the break-even point of their overall business, and then how many products they need to make, and sell at that profit margin in order to not just break even, but make what they want to make. So in Pricing 101, after you do that math, then we discuss pricing strategies and how that fits together in your brand. So I want to let you know this class, Pricing 101, is only available in the Starship and as a bonus to Pay Yourself. So Pay Yourself is going to open up again this week. To learn more about it, to join me on the webinar and ask all of your questions, you just go to taraswiger.com/podcast151 and sign up. And when you go to that sign up, you're going to get the transcript for today's lesson, and you're going to get a questionnaire and a worksheet where you can fill in any of the questions you want to ask me on the webinar. So I hope that this helped you realize why you can't just take one pricing strategy and apply it. One strategy does not fit everyone's. You need to take into account your supplies, your time, and your production capabilities. I get a lot of people asking me, like, is there a way that I can make money with this if I'm only spending 10 or 20 hours a week? And the answer is usually yes, if you're spending time on the right things and you're pricing appropriately and you've got your goals set up appropriately for the amount of time and supplies and production you can do. So all of that fits together, and you can fit it all together. You just actually have to do the math to figure it out. So I will see you tomorrow in the webinar. I hope you have an enthusiastically profitable week, and I will see you then. Thanks so much.